Welcome to our conversation today. We're going to be talking about faithful presence, really presencing ourselves in a neighbourhood, and what are some of the challenges around that. It's the Paul and Paul show, so we've got Paul Sparks with Paul Cameron, and we've also added to our conversation today Deith and also Karina Bentley. It's great to have you together with us in this conversation. Paul, you might like to just kick us off a little bit. This is a particularly, I use this in no way to demean your commitment to it, but it's one of your catchcries or catchphrases, faithful presence. Can you help us understand a little bit about the way you see it?
Yeah, I think maybe the best place to begin is to think of faithful presence as a central posture for being human in kingdom perspective, in a theological perspective, to say, what does it mean for a person to have an ongoing posture of listening for the Spirit, an ongoing posture that does not try to control beyond what you're sensing the Spirit calling you to, but also on the same token takes the risk. A lot of times we use the narrative of Adam and Eve, the story of Adam and Eve, and of course the first problem in the garden is the grasping after knowledge of good and evil, like God, to kind of have that transcendent perspective to know good and evil in all situations and circumstances, which God had only called them to the garden, a very specific place where they had bodily limitations, where they had human limitations, and to try to grasp that without God was the first problem, right? And the irony of the story is the very second problem was now, after trying to be transcendent, trying to be like God, now they don't even want to take responsibility for their human agency and human responsibility. And so you see Adam blaming Eve, Eve blaming the serpent, and so forth. And so there's this beautiful relational posture between those two tensions of transcendence and kind of the place of ignoring your limitations, and on the other hand, the place of ignoring your responsibilities, and the place of accepting the risk of relationship and what that calls forth in particular settings, you know.
It sounds like you're describing the 21st century. It's a timeless issue, isn't it?
It is. You see the human dilemma around this. You can see it in churches where perhaps you have a congregation who wants to ignore their responsibilities for participation and engagement in church life. And then you see perhaps in the leadership team or the pastoral circle, you see oftentimes where they are tempted to transcend their limits to control the situation, and they do more than they ought to be doing instead of living into that faithful presence. You see it also generationally. You see the last generation, what might be framed the modern generation, who always wanted the absolute technical, rational, scientific answer for all things. And then you see the postmodern generation coming after that, and at the extreme levels, them saying no truth can be discovered, no risk can be grappled with, and kind of a nihilism that might take place as a result, you know.
And you're describing various main versions, and yet there is a subversion that we're called to be faithfully present in our neighbourhoods.
Well, yeah, you're bringing up my Old Testament theologian, Walter Brueggemann.
Yep. One of our heroes.
Yeah. Who says that between those worlds of control and kind of not taking on any agency is a world where you step into the risk of relationship. So, you know, this idea of faithful presence brings up significant concerns, especially when you move beyond just one person, when you start saying, how can we collectively be a faithful presence? All kinds of concerns come up as to how that's possible. What are the ways that we engage in that, and how do we move forward in that?
I was thinking about what you meant by faithful presence over the past few weeks, and I was just thinking, like, how do I do this in my church? How do I do this in my neighbourhood? And the first thing I thought, and correct me if I'm wrong, was thinking about how I view the people in my church and in my neighbourhood, and actually putting effort into seeing them as God sees them. So rather than just going in and saying, oh yes, all these people have value and I'm sure that that's there and, you know, God loves them, it's actually like, oh, who is this person? And what is their value? Because they have it, that, you know, they are valuable, and what is it, you know, how are they special and who are they? And really trying to understand and really love the people that I am in relationship with. Is that a good place to start?
I think so. You know, I think faithful presence is a very relational word. It's a word that has at its premise that there's a way of fitting together, a way of relating together, both with God and with each other and with the land and the built environment. There's a way of doing that brings healing, flourishing, and so forth. And I think at the very beginning of that is that we see the humanity, the beauty, the gifts, the deep image of God that others are created in. And if you can't begin there, how are you ever going to enter into that relationship faithfully? You know, I love that posture, Karina. I think that's the beginning place of faithful presence.
Good.
It sounds, I think at the summit you mentioned to us talking about the, I guess, missional approach that we've traditionally had, where we sort of send ourselves out and expect, like we train ourselves up in some ways and go out and almost think that we're imparting something onto someone. But what you were saying there, Karina, almost brings back faithful presence is a key of that, the formative process that happens in that to us as well. I think, like, when I first heard you speak about faithful presence and really, I guess, putting in place how it actually transforms who we are, it makes me think that there's lots of things happening when we engage in faithful presence, but there's also this tension that we live in what does that actually look like to put ourselves in that posture?
Yes.
Do you have any words around that?
Well, I'd say, first of all, I loved how you brought that back to what Karina said, because in order to see someone the way that God sees them, in order to see them well, it requires a receptive posture versus only I already have what you need, or I am the answer to your problem. You absolutely have to take on a posture of what is the Spirit saying through this person? What am I really seeing? And I just think one of the beautiful things about faithful presence is it holds in tension the kind of missional posture of I'm here to give, I'm here to with an outward hope to serve and to love and to offer care. And it holds that intention with what is the Spirit saying to me? How am I to be shaped and formed by this relationship and by this interaction? And that is, I think those two sides of those coins really brings a meaningful and more likely to be faithful posture in the relationship that won't cause as much colonialism, as much of a breakdown that you see where we try to go in doing something good and then it totally unravels and turns into something bad. If we enter our places in faithful presence, awake to what the Spirit is calling and saying in each unique situation, coming with the receptivity that says, I want to listen and learn, but that also I have something maybe to offer as I get to know this relationship, I think we're going to find ourselves in a much better place to be true ministers, to true missionary orders, as it were, who have taken on the customs, the understandings of the people before we go in and try to do what we want to do, you know.
And so it involves a posture of listening, of it's about the other and not just about us.
Yes.
But the beauty and wonder of that is in the process of listening, we grow. In the time that we spend with the other, we learn about ourselves. And together, God, through His Spirit, does something that enables us to be that order of local missionaries that He might be calling us to be. Thanks so much for the conversation. We hope that as you listen to this, you'll continue the conversation. And there's a lot more things that we need to be learning together. Thanks very much.